Do you think there will be civil war? We could be in serious trouble.
I think we are.
Send them!
And I see those fractures deepening. And when immigration is not addressed, you will have tension. It is inevitable. Then that will spill into conflict, and a violent conflict. No, you're not going to have a cultural centre in the middle of Leicester Square. No, you're not going to have a mosque in... And this is exactly the conversation I had with the Muslim clergy in Kosovo. Exactly. I said, why do you want to put it in the 12th century Orthodox church's churchyard on the graves? Because we want to demonstrate we can live next door to our Serbian brothers. My background as military, policing, did not prepare me for the evil cockpit that is British politics.
I think that the reality is that the party is probably over.
I wasn't prepared for the whole of my top team working against me from day one. I had a relationship with Jo Marney, a lady who's 30 years younger than me.
How old was she?
She was 24 when we got in.
That is young, isn't it?
It doesn't sound very nice.
I'd left my wife and two lovely daughters for her. She sent some messages that were interpreted as quite racist in nature. Maybe I made an error of judgment. They used the fact that I'd had this relationship as the stick to beat me with.
Ex-UKIP leader, Mr. Henry Bolton.
And they did.
You've broken up with your girlfriend and it seems your party is breaking up with you.
Would you leave your wife or disown your daughter because she'd sent a message like that to somebody privately?
I know it's annoying when creators ask you to subscribe, but since I started, the channel's grown 10 times faster. If you don't sub, YouTube probably won't show you the next episode. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Hit subscribe. Tell me a little bit about your past background and what happened with UKIP.
Right, ex-military, ex-police, crisis management, sort of secondee from the Foreign Office on many things: Croatia, Bosnia, Macedonia, Albania, North Africa, Central Asia, God knows where, all sorts of crises and conflicts, trying to, being thrown into the middle of them to deal with them, including arguments between the US Marine Corps and the British military in Northern Helmand, and trying to sort that out. And returned to the UK actually via the European Union. Interesting with my background, where I was Chief Planner for Common Security and Defence Policy for the European Union for 3 years, dealing with Ukraine when the Russians went into Crimea and the Donbass and so on. Came back, having experienced the European Union at first hand. I was in UKIP and threw my hat into the ring for the party. Actually, the reason I did it, just briefly, is because no politician then or since has provided a vision for the United Kingdom going forward. Not one. Where do we want to be 20 to 25 years from now, and how do we get there? Because out of that vision stems all of your policy. Every policy should be orientated to what it is you want to achieve for the nation. If you don't know what you want to achieve for the nation, then your policies are going to be incoherent, inconsistent, and reactive rather than proactive and forward-leaning. So anyway, that's why I did it. UKIP was in a unique position at the time to do it. But from day one, I was opposed by the whole of the National Executive Committee, who had campaigned against me, my leadership. The Constitution made it very difficult for me to fight that because there were very few powers for the leader of the party. The new Constitution really came into effect after Nigel left, although it was written before he left. And so it's hard work. And then I had a relationship with Jo Marney, lady 30 years younger than me. And that sort of then gave a feasting fest or a feeding fest for the sharks.
Because she was younger?
She was 30 years younger.
Is that why, though?
No. I'd left my wife and two lovely daughters for her. It then emerged that before I'd met her, quite some time before I'd met her, she sent some messages to somebody else, one-to-one Facebook message, that were interpreted as quite racist in nature. I think a couple of glasses downrange and a bit of, people winding each other up, and she'd fired this off. And then it was sold to the press to inflict damage, which it did. I spent some months fighting that process, but it was an interesting, my background as military, policing, international sort of security-related diplomacy, if you like, did not prepare me for the evil cockpit that is British politics, and largely the British media, who all feed it, and there's all sorts of manipulation and so on, back briefing and everything going on. I wasn't really aware of that, and as a military man, I rather, sort of without thinking about it, thought you get into that position of leadership,
And even people who don't necessarily agree with you, for the sake of the organisation, for the mission, if you like, they're at least a line a bit behind you. I wasn't prepared for the whole of my top team working against me from day one. Really day one. Well, in fact, before I'd even got into the position. So a different environment, and I wasn't quite ready for it. One hell of a learning curve.
Do you think it was because of the relationship or
No, it had started before that. It had started even before I was elected leader and before the relationship, which started some months later.
Okay.
So it was already, what happened, that relationship was then used, exploited, because they were trying to undermine me throughout, but I'd got I'd been elected by the members. I'd been around the country. There was a lot of support for me, but the national executive didn't want me there. So this gave them an opportunity to stir the pot. And every time the story started dying away, then it would be picked up again. And it was fed by things like sort of blogs written by relatives of members of the NEC and so on that made accusations, for example, that my entire military career was a fiction. Well, all you have to do is go on Facebook and you'll see that's not the case. But anyway, once that story's out there, then by the time you get an opportunity to disprove it, it's already out there, and it's sort of, so all of this was going on. It's a nasty, nasty environment, and I wasn't quite ready for it. I fought it, and I think I nearly won. But then the final point was the extraordinary general meeting that was called by the national executive for a vote of no confidence by the members. It was originally scheduled to be held in Derby, but there were a lot of, I had quite a support base around Derby. I've got copies of the emails to members of the NEC, former NEC who might be listening, in which they discuss that very point. So they moved the location to Birmingham. They bussed people in using funds partly from the party and partly from a donor to bus people in who pledged to vote against me. So the whole thing was, and I knew I was going to lose it, but I stood my ground, feeling that if I stepped away from it, it was they that had the moral lack of integrity, and I was standing firm, as was my right in the Constitution and the rules of procedure.
How did it make you feel after all this media storm and everything?
It was difficult not to feel bitter. It was difficult not to want to be vindictive. These are highly unpleasant people who acting entirely in their own interests, not in the interests of the party, not in the interests of anything else, but for their own status and their own egos and so on. Many of them had tried had competed for the leadership at one point or another. But at the time, it was, look, I've done my bit. I've stood by my principles. I've done nothing wrong. Maybe I made an error of judgment in getting involved with somebody else. I don't regret it.
You're not still with her, are you?
No, we're not. But not, it was nothing political. And I don't regret it. But what I do regret is not having, which I can't change, and I couldn't even change with hindsight, is not having the awareness of quite how evil and nasty some people in the political and the media environment can be.
While travelling, I realised my wallet might actually be smarter than me. Here's 3 reasons why. 1, it knows how to stay organised. This is the Card Holder Pro by my partner Exeter. Aluminium, slim, and it fans out my cards with 1 click. Pretty cool. I still can't fold a map, but my wallet can manage 7 cards with just 1 click. Number 2, it looks smarter. Italian leather, slimmer than my old wallet, and it fits up to 14 cards. Number 3, it doesn't get lost. The Finder card works with my phone. Just 2 hours of sunshine charges it for 3 months. Meanwhile, I can't even remember to charge my toothbrush.
Andrew, if your balls weren't in a sack, you'd lose them too. You've left your wallet behind.
Use my code in the link below to get an extra discount on top of web sales. Exeter, the future of wallets.
We're currently running our full sale with up to 35% off, and with my code you'll get up to 45% off.
And the media can be, there are people there, and I won't name names, but
you probably are aware of it. But there are people out there in the media.
You can name some names.
I shan't, because it's some time ago and probably I should have called it out at the time. But there are people out there who will rip into you for going off with another woman, who are themselves for the greatest philanderers on God's earth. They will, they're sat there during lockdown snorting coke. They're doing, all of this sort of stuff. That if you're in politics, they would. Who is holding the media to account? Nobody. But the media is often makes it their business to shape public opinion.
Well, some of them, Hugh Edwards and all that, they did get held to account eventually.
They do eventually, but there are a lot of people who are shaping the public narrative, shaping public opinion, rather than simply informing it. And if you are shaping public opinion, then I think you are perverting democracy, because then people are going to the ballot box, having made decisions based upon that twisted, manipulated, biased story that they've heard, rather than objective facts and analysis. And I think that's a problem for society. And I think it actually feeds some of the same behaviour in politicians.
It is a problem, but can you imagine how boring the media, the news would be if everyone was just utterly objective?
Andrew, if everybody was objective about me, it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, well, because you're an interesting person. But in general, you need a bit of hey, I'm
you do
angry.
Need to spice it up. Yeah, and I was angry. I was so angry.
Yeah,
but I had to hold that down. Even I look back.
Yeah,
there are people who I know, if they walked in to this studio now, I would have an almost overwhelming desire to drive their head through the wall. Really, but I wouldn't. I'd shake hands with them. I'd say hello. Because it doesn't achieve anything. But I'm furious that we've got people in leadership positions, or in the sort of close and around leadership positions in this country, who are of that type of person, and that to me is offensive.
People have affairs. A huge number of people have affairs. It's part of life, and it's a private thing, isn't it?
It wasn't the fact that I'd had an affair. It was the fact that people were trying to undermine me within the party, because I was the leader and they tried to stand for the leadership, and they were unhappy that they didn't get it. They thought they should get it. They didn't like the platform I was on. I was saying, look, UKIP is in this unique position to provide the nation with that conversation, to trigger that conversation. Where do we want to go? We've had the referendum. Where do we want to go with it? What's our vision for the future, and how are we going to get there? Because nobody has a plan. And what will happen is that we will leave, there will be no plan. And so we'll have this sort of reactive politics, firefighting politics on borders, on trade and everything else, because there's no plan, there's no coherence. Our partners in the European Union will sort of look at us and go, wow, we thought you guys would really have your act together, but we haven't. So it would be embarrassing. We'd be undermining our status internationally and therefore our influence. All sorts of things go wrong. What do we want? Why have we left the European Union? Where do we want to go with it? UKIP's in a position to have that conversation. To do that, we have to professionalise the party. We've got to step up. We're no longer a single issue party. We're now a party that is looking to be the opposition party. Well, the national executive, almost to a person, wanted to go stay with single issue, either anti-Islam or anti-immigration, or some of them both, and that was it. Didn't want to go anywhere else. And that's not serious politics. Those are serious issues, but they're not serious politics. And we've got to talk about them, include them in our political discourse, but and discuss them and address concerns. But you can't have a political party that stands only on that platform. It's not going to get very far.
I agree.
So that was the problem. And they used the fact that I'd had this relationship, or was in this relationship with Joe, as the stick to beat me with. And they did. And there were people in the Conservative Party who wanted to undermine UKIP because they saw UKIP as a threat then. They saw me as a threat because of my background, which is pretty unique. And So they used that as well. And so although they weren't partners as such, I was the common foe. And then when it emerged that Jo had sent these messages, as I say, before I'd met her and before she was anything involved in the public eye, when that happened, then of course that was extra grist to the mill. And then you've got Andrew Marr involved, you've got Piers Morgan involved, you've got all these people who are sort of ripping into me because apparently I'm a racist. Well, no, I'm not. Well, your partner is. Would you leave your wife or disown your daughter because she'd sent a message like that to somebody privately and they'd sold it to the media? Would you disown them for that? Would you divorce your wife? No, of course not. So and that would be a dishonourable thing to do.
Yes.
If they put their hands up and said, "Look, okay, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. I'm really sorry," which is what Jo did, but that wasn't the point.
How old was she?
At the time, she was 24 when we got in.
That is young, isn't it? Where did you meet?
At a UKIP Christmas party dinner.
Bloody hell! And you were what, 54?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Well,
but I'm young at heart.
Yeah, bloody hell. Hey, how was the Tommy rally?
Yeah, it was good. I wasn't there all day because I was there actually for the SDP conference. I'm a spokesman of the SDP on foreign affairs and so on. So I was speaking there, but it was in Westminster, and so I sort of dipped in twice to the rally. It was good. I didn't see any trouble. I saw a whole bunch of guys who, I rather related to. They're sort of they're being ex-army. They were out there having a good day. I saw no problem and I saw no agitation. There was, of course, some, one or two isolated incidents. But what was more interesting was actually, well, first of all, there was the atmosphere, which was friendly, and it was, everybody was there to enjoy, but make a point and be there and be seen to be there. But afterwards, I was in a pub in Westminster and sort of walked to this pub. This place is full of, and of course, some of them recognised me. And next thing we were all chatting and so on, and it was impressive. A lot of people were saying to me, what do you think of Tommy? I was a bit ambivalent. I was sort of gauging the temperature of the water first, Sure. And so I said, well, we've got to talk about what he's been saying, because he's right. In just about everything he has said, he's been correct. The thing is, he's in some ways his own worst enemy. When you got bail conditions and you violate the bail conditions, then of course you can expect something to come from that. So
with the film, was that?
Well, I wasn't relating to any specific thing, but anyway, these people. Well, look, we're not here because of Tommy. We're here because we're worried about what's happening to the country. There's three guys from Wales, South Wales, who were telling me, look, they'd come up together, Welsh lads, and they said, look, our families are struggling. We've got no work. The mine's closed, and when the mine's closed, everybody forgot about us. The children at school don't have any aspiration. There's no hope for the future because there's no jobs, because there's no work, there's no industry, there's no infrastructure. And we feel that nobody even knows we exist. And, so nothing to do with race, nothing to do with Tommy Robinson. It was just that it was this gathering, and they felt that they could contribute to saying, listen, there's us over here. Pay attention. We've got problems, and you're not listening. And it wasn't aggressive. It was they're at their wits' end. And I would say that applies to everybody I spoke to, and I must have spoken to about 50 or 60 people that evening. And that makes my heart cry for this country. And the flags are. They're more than just the complaint. They're a plea. Listen, we want to be proud of our country. We've got a right to be proud of our country. We're here because we still have hope. But the response, I think, politically, from the left, that these are, I think it was John McDonnell has called this a street violence movement. There's a variety, racist thugs,
which are classist, isn't it?
It's classist, but we've got this urban liberal elite who think that they are above everybody else, that their opinions matter more than anybody else, that their lived experience, can we use that phrase, is the reality of the world, and that what people from Ammanford in South Wales or Hartlepool or Bolton tell you is just, well, they're just, discount them. They're uneducated thugs and they're peasants from the back streets. They don't know. And even if there was a job, they probably wouldn't want it. And which is so not true. And as long as there is that response, then the flames of this concern will just grow. And I don't know where that ends. What should happen is that all politicians, in government or outside, in parliament or outside, should be saying, look, what's the root cause of this? Let's listen. Might there be something? If so, we should be trying to do something about it. Because as long as we don't address those things, that frustration will grow. And it's not militant at the moment. It's not violent at the moment. And I enjoyed that day. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was great to mix with these guys. They were all friendly. They were all having a good time. And I think it was a bit of light relief for them from the normal drudgery of life too. Yeah. So, no, and well done on them for making the effort, I say.
You've pointed out as well the difference between the media reaction to the arrests at Tommy Robinson's rally and Unite the Kingdom, and also the Palestine Action, perhaps Notting Hill Carnival. What are the differences?
Well, if you look at I looked at the figures because I knew there was some arrests at the Palestine Action event, which was the week before. There were about 1,800 people present at that, so a much smaller event. But nonetheless, there were 900 arrests, which you would expect because Palestine Action is prescribed. But 17 of those arrests, so around about 1 in 100, was for assault on police. Right? Nobody mentions that. I don't recall any outcry about the way the police were handled, or the assaults on the police, or anything of that sort.
Because it's a serious crime, an assault.
I'm a former police officer. Yes, it's an extremely serious crime. But yeah, it is. And at a minimum, really, it should carry 4 years in jail. So, but 17 arrests, so roughly just under 1 in 100. Okay, this weekend, at the Unite the Kingdom rally, there were 25 arrests when there were between 110 and 150,000, and the Met saying 150,000, I think.
Some say much more. People.
Yeah, exactly. I suspect it was a lot more. It seemed that, but it's very difficult to count those numbers. But so we're actually there talking about around about 1 in every 6,000 people attending were arrested. So, what's that? 1 in 100 and 1 in 6,000.
Yeah.
So, and there's a massive outcry now. And you'll have more than that arrested at many football matches. And then you've got Notting Hill Carnival, where there were 55 arrests for assault of police officers. So, where there's, it fuels the flames. It increases the anger and the frustration when you get a proportion of the media or commentators or politicians flagging this up, a relatively peaceful. I condemn violence, and public disorder. There's no call for it. But condemning this event because they don't politically agree with the people who were there, but you don't hear a squeak out of them when it's people whose political ideologies or opinions align with their own. And that is the two double standards that lead to a perception of two-tier justice, two-tier policing, and that actually there's a two-tier society. There's the urban liberal elite sitting in their little arrogant bubble, and there's the rest of the people who are trying to get on with an increasingly complex and difficult life. It's not going to end well if it doesn't change.
Do you think there will be civil war or something like that?
I think that no. I hope not. I don't think it is likely because us Brits don't have a propensity to do that. We might talk about one of my. I'm descended from Oliver Cromwell's parents through his sister, but since those days, 400 years ago, we've not particularly taken to the streets in violent sort of rebellion, and I don't think we will. But
there was a King Charles then and a King Charles now. You have to hide in a
that's true.
Hide in a tree or whatever he did.
That's true.
Did he hide in an oak
He
tree?
did, right? Yeah. Good Lord, I did. That's true. Yes.
Yeah. Let's see how sprightly
I
he
hadn't
is.
made that connection.
See how sprightly. Yeah. I'm joking, of course. By the way, because anyone's, I know he's not well and everything. I'm not joking about him jumping into. I don't think he's jumping a tree.
No,
but go on.
But I think there is a risk of increasing instability, increasing public disorder, and who's going to bear the brunt of that? It's going to be police officers and people like that who are trying to do their job, ill-equipped and ill-organised for it, though they are, because the last 20 years they've been undermined by the Conservative government and their policies towards policing and cuts. But I do think that the country's in a very, very vulnerable position. We do need if this nation is going to go forward and succeed as a nation, economically, socially, in terms of investment, anything, then we have to be stable and we have to be a society that is, we have to recognise we live in one set of islands, under one flag, under one law, under one monarch, under one constitutional monarchy. And we have to some extent pull together. I'm 63, that's not that old, but it's long enough to start worrying that we have not been this disunited, this fractured as a society for a very, very long time. And I see those fractures deepening. And when immigration is not addressed, when the cultural impact on our communities is changing so rapidly that people can't get used to it. I was, for a while, a senior advisor to the Secretary General of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I won't go into it in depth, but 57 countries, the world's largest intergovernmental security arrangement. It's diplomatic, but deals with security issues, conflict prevention, mitigation of conflicts, such as Ukraine and so on. Weekly meetings on Ukraine between Russian and American, European ambassadors and us and so on. But and one of the things about that organisation is that we recognised that social engineering, social change, at such a rate that communities can't adjust as quickly as the change is imposed, tend to go violent because people respond defensively but in a violent manner. So, even if you argue that immigration is good for whatever reason, then if you introduce other cultures to your own more rapidly than your own society or the indigenous society can adjust to it, you will have tension. You will. There is no if, there is no but. It is inevitable. And if you do it too fast, then that will spill into conflict, and a violent conflict. And there's various places around even the flanks of Europe where that has happened in recent years. You look at some of the influences on the Balkans. So I'm seriously concerned because no one is taking any notice.
So bizarre, isn't it? How did they not see this coming?
Because they are inadequate people.
Blair, Cameron, Boris.
I think they've all been driven by all sorts of motives. Blair, for example, at that time was really cozying up to George Bush and the Americans, whether with a view to his further career and, he was later appointed as envoy to the Middle East and all this sort of thing, or what quite, I don't know, but he was very much cozying up to them. That influences it. There should be one influence on every person, whatever their politics are, there should be only one influence on, sort of grand influence, if you like, on any person who is in public office. And that is to further the interests of the United Kingdom and the British people. Nothing else. Everything else flows from that. If your motive is anything else, you shouldn't be anywhere near public office.
Do you think they maybe didn't see this coming, though, a little bit? Is Blair and Boris and all that?
I think they didn't, but I don't think they were really looking at that. They were, but, I was in Kosovo for 5 months before the NATO bombing. And we were passing the message. There was something called the Diplomatic Observer Mission. There was a very small group of us in there observing. I was the liaison to the Serbian security forces whilst they were fighting the Albanians. So I was on the ground in the snow and the mud and everything with them in firefights, not armed, but reporting back to London what was going on. our message was, if you, what needs to happen here, both sides are wrong. The Serbs don't know how else to respond to this rebellion because their tactical doctrine, their training, their equipment and so on is all scaled to use a tank to free a hostage rather than, you know, a special forces team. That kind of exaggerates. Well, I don't exaggerate, but there was a hostage taken, and then they put a battalion of tanks in there with the view that it was going to kill the hostage, but at the same time, it would deter another hostage being taken. So this sort of response, unsophisticated by our military doctrine, but they had no concept of how else to do it. On the other side, the Albanians were not some group of sort of romantic, freedom-loving freedom fighters. This all started with Albanian organised crime and the Serbs trying to crack down on it. Yes, there were other political things going on, but ultimately what Blair and Madeleine Albright were concerned about was this, once again, after Bosnia and Croatia, once again, this is the Serbs. The Serbs are going to cause problems forever. So we're going to bomb these people. Ultimately, we're going to deal with the regime in Belgrade. But we were saying, if you do what we think you're going to do, because we weren't really privy to it, and you decide to bomb the Serbs, then you are going to have one almighty problem with the Albanians. You will have Albanian organised crime streaming into Europe. And that's what we've got. And you know, that's had an impact on drugs in Europe. I mean, the impact has been massive over those years. How does
that work? Because that's the same I hear about, you know, we went into all these countries, so now they're coming over to here. Mm-hmm. How does it work? We bomb the Serbs, and so the Albanians are like, oh, they were on our side, we're all going to go to their country, to the UK. Why do they come over?
Because when the Serbs, without going too much into the history of the conflict and the Balkan Wars, when we started bombing the Serbs, the gloves came off the Serbs. They knew that they had limited time to try and consolidate their hold on Kosovo, and that meant dealing with the Kosovo Liberation Army. So they went on the offensive in Kosovo. When they went on the offensive, whilst some of us were on the ground, the Albanians took some sort of comfort in that. But when this offensive started, then Albanians started to leave Kosovo, flood out of Kosovo into neighbouring Macedonia, now the Republic of North Macedonia, and into northern Albania. And so there were all these refugees, massive refugee crisis, massive international response to try and look after them. Blair, thinking that and I think he genuinely did believe, despite what we were telling him back in London, that the Albanians were the poor, innocent victims in all this, and the Serbs were the nasty, you know, the evil empire. And so he opened the doors to the UK, to refugees coming to the UK. Once you've then got the familial contacts, then fine, then they keep coming. The other thing is that, and a lot of people don't recognise this, that Albanians don't just live in Albania. Just probably 90% of the population, more than that now, 98 probably now, in Kosovo is Albanian. About a third of the population in Macedonia is Albanian. Southern Serbia there's a lot of Albanians there. So these people, and parts of Greece. So we opened when back in the UK, the government didn't have a clue about that. So they opened the door to Kosovar refugees. And then Albanians from Albania and northern Macedonia and everywhere else decided, hey, that's a good one. We'll nip over there as well. And they all pretended to be Albanian refugees coming here too. So we had a flood of them. So there we go.
That's how it all started.
And we're still dealing with the consequences now, because then through contacts with the Turkish organised crime and so on, then you've got the drugs networks being established, and the Albanians can be incredibly violent in a criminal sense. Very, very bloody.
Right.
And so that's permeated and made and upped the violence that organised crime is prepared to use in Europe now too.
It's just a mad world we've got now, isn't it?
It's crazy. But it all comes, you said something earlier, so why didn't people see this? Mm. You can't excuse someone like Blair, who is very astute, but I think his eyes were on other things, as I say. But we've got a political class here in the UK now, particularly in the House of Commons, with some exceptions, who shouldn't be anywhere near those green benches. They don't have the experience, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the intellect, they don't have the analytical capability, they don't have the plain thinking capability. They do not. They're way in over their head, and they don't even know it. And you know that where are the statesmen in this country? There are none. I don't think anybody can really think of anybody who really stands tall on the international stage, for example.
Because who wants to become a politician now? I don't know if that's that attractive to people.
I can speak from my own experience. No, it's not attractive unless you've got an ethos of service. And, you know, being ex-military, ex-police and done all the things I've done, I just I get offended when I see incompetence and people suffering as a result. I don't know why. I always have, even when I was a child, I used to cheat to lose in games because I felt sorry for the other person if they lost because they'd been. So I'd take that on myself. So there is a serious problem with the quality of people that we have in Parliament at the moment, and if you've got a serious problem with the sort of the 650 MPs or whatever, then you've got a very poor quality pool from which to fish. If you've got to put a cabinet together, if you've got a poor cabinet, then ultimately you've got a very weak prime minister.
You've spoken about protecting strategic assets from foreign ownership.
Yes.
Is our culture being sold off to foreign ownership now? We're just getting rid of that and selling it off to people?
I don't know that we're selling off our culture. I don't know specifically why you are selling off, but I do think that our culture is being displaced.
And that can get you labelled a terrorist for saying it. Have you seen that?
There we go.
Have you seen that?
I'm here. Come and take me.
Yeah. Did you see that? Prevent.
I haven't seen that said. That is
Prevent now. One of the things they look for, you know, in terms of a terrorist, if you believe that British culture is being replaced, then you are now.
Well, let me tell you something, Andrew.
Yeah.
Going back to Kosovo, because the Albanians and the Muslims, the Muslim clergy, and so on in Kosovo, a lot of it actually funded and encouraged at the time by the Turkish government. I know I was there at that point after the NATO bombing. Kosovo was put under UN protectorate, and it was a UN protectorate for a year. I was a district governor for the United Nations for a year, so looking after local government, establishing local government, you know, responsible for everything, security, everything in that district. And I know, because I had to deal with it, that the Albanians were actively pursuing a process of displacing the culture of the Serbs in Kosovo, even though there were still Serbs there. They wanted to build a mosque in the graveyard of a 12th century Orthodox church. So that kind of thing. And it's interesting that you say that, because the United Nations and NATO had a name for this process, and it was cultural displacement. So we used that term because it was what was going on. It was the term that described very accurately what was going on. It was a deliberate campaign of cultural displacement. And the other term we used was passive ethnic cleansing. The cultural displacement had the effect of making those Serbs who'd remained in the province, who had had nothing to do with the conflict, most of them were elderly and infirm anyway, feel so uncomfortable that they would do anything they could to leave, having thought that they would just be allowed to live a peaceful life. No, that they were made to feel uncomfortable. That's why the Albanians wanted, where the Serbs still were, why they wanted to put mosques in the centre of those areas, so that then you'd have the call to prayer, and then 5 times a day, particularly on a Friday, then you'd get everybody going through, all the Albanians going through that Serbian area. It made people feel uncomfortable. There was no violence, there was no threat of violence, but it was culturally intimidating.
It's a loud call to prayer as well, isn't it?
It is a loud
call. Everyone's had that experience.
I have actually lived in somewhere where the minaret was literally as far, well, twice the distance from me to you, away from my window.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we've all had that experience. You book an Airbnb or something somewhere, and you go at 5 in the morning or 6 or whatever.
But you know what, Andrew? I don't mind it in those areas.
I just think it depends. Is that a Muslim area, or are we talking about I've just popped off to like the south of France?
Oh no, that was a Muslim area. But
often it is that. It's just you're in some holiday somewhere in Europe.
Precisely. And that's what I'm talking about here. That's what I've got a problem with.
It's dominance. It's an expression of dominance.
It is dominance. It's a method of control and dominance. And I think we need to recognise it for what it is. And we don't need to accuse anybody of anything, but we need to have, and we need to we need to demand that the Muslim community in the United Kingdom recognises the concern. Just as I was saying earlier about the United Kingdom rally, people in authority, whether it's police, whether it's members of parliament, need to start listening to people's concerns, even if those concerns are shaped and misguided. Then these people are living a life in which their perceptions and their experience gives them worries and anxieties. And they're trying to tell you. And if you don't want to listen, then they are going to get more and more desperate, more and more worried, and something's going to give somewhere. And it's the same with this. If people don't listen to the concerns that I think are valid, given my experience working for the United Nations, for the OSCE, for the European Union in these sort of contexts, and for the British government abroad, if people don't start listening to the valid and justifiable concerns that, if you like, the indigenous population, I know you're not supposed to call them that either because we're a country of immigrants, yes, but,
But other countries have indigenous peoples. Why doesn't this one?
Exactly. So I'm going to call us the indigenous, the Celts, the Britons, whoever. But the people who lived in the Yorkshire Dales 150 years ago, with their flat caps and all the rest of it, and their pipes, their successors, the present generation, all of these people, they've got legitimate concerns, and I think that authorities and the Muslim community in the UK need to recognise that, engage with it, and address it. And if addressing it means that we say, hang on a minute, no, you're not going to have a cultural centre in the middle of Leicester Square. No, you're not going to have a mosque in, why are you...
The Lake District now.
Yeah, the Lake District, yeah, sorry. And why do you want to put it there rather than, and this is exactly the conversation I had with the Muslim clergy in Kosovo, exactly. I said, why do you want to put it in the 12th century Orthodox church's churchyard on the graves, rather than where there are no Albanians, where there are no Muslims, and put the mosque, and why don't you want to put the mosque in this area of town where there are Muslims? Because we want to demonstrate we can live next door to our Serbian brothers. I said, do you think the Serbs will see it that way?
That's chilling, actually.
And they said, when I said, do you think the Serbs will see it that way? They said, if the Serbs don't see it that way, it proves that they're not prepared to live with us. So putting who's at fault here, and so, and I said, well, it's damn well not happening, you can build a mosque over here. And it wasn't built for 17 years because I wouldn't let them build it. So
bloody hell.
It took them 17 years. So I had the power to give them, to gift them for 999 years a parcel of municipal land right in the centre in a nice green triangle, sort of in the middle of the Albanian area of town, which I did. And that all this urgency, all this passion that they needed a mosque, they didn't respond for 17 years. 17 years before the foundations were dug on that mosque. So it wasn't about the mosque. It was about that cultural domination. Now, we've got to have an honest conversation. And here's a challenge for them. If the Muslim community is not prepared to listen to those concerns, engage with them, allay them, then surely we have to be concerned about what their motives are. Is it what NATO and the United Nations termed cultural displacement and passive ethnic cleansing? Because if you can't convince us that it's not, let's put the ball in their court. Why not? Why has it got to be in our court? If somebody comes into my house and I welcome them into my house, but then on day 2 they say, well, look, I actually don't like the fact that you've got the TV in your living room in that corner. Can we move it to that corner? And I like your bedroom. It's better than the guest bedroom. Can we move in there? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I want to, it's important because that's what leads to frustration and anger, particularly when you don't address those concerns. You don't even listen.
Yeah, and might in 10, 20, 30 years lead to a democratic change of guard, Well, indeed,
there is that as well. Isn't it interesting that, in this country, I'm glad to say, we have a democratic process, but if you get a majority vote in a local council area, and in local council wards, and then they're whatever, and they are sectarian votes, which is increasingly the case. either sort of ethno or nationalistic sectarianism or religious sectarianism, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Pakistani, whether it's whatever it might be. If it's a vote along those lines, then you get a predominance of their representatives in the local council, and then they will make decisions according to their religious beliefs or the interests of that community to the exclusion of others. Now, that is not me making it up. You can go to all sorts of places in the world, and not that far away, where I have lived and worked for years, like Macedonia, like Albania, like all sorts of places, where you can see where this has happened. And
not to mention Lebanon and Iran.
Indeed. So you've got this Afghanistan even.
Yeah.
So this is a fact that this happens when you bring sectarianism into politics. And it is happening in the United Kingdom by democratic means. But once there, what do you do with it? Because then it's no longer democratic, because decisions are not made on a democratic basis, but on a sectarian basis. But it's established itself through democracy.
We could be in serious trouble.
I think we are. I think we just haven't woken up to it. And I'm not being – I am not a militant person. I don't want to fight with anybody. I've seen it. I've been there. I've seen the consequences. I've experienced the consequences. I still have nightmares. I still cry at the drop of a hat over, certain circumstances when I recall things. And I recall the hurt and the trauma that's been inflicted on entirely innocent people who just want to go about their lives. Rather like many of those people who they share some of the same concerns that people who were on that march on Saturday. They're ordinary people who are worried. And I've seen where it leads, and it breaks my heart. And I don't want it here in this country. It's not that I'm racist, not at all. I'm not prejudiced against one religion or another. But this cultural clash, it's not a clash yet, and I don't want it to become one. But if one side or the other is not prepared to listen, I fear that it may become a clash. And I don't want those things that I've seen abroad that came about for these very reasons start happening here in the UK or in the countries of our friends and neighbours.
Do you ever have the opportunity to speak to some of the maybe more centrist-y kind of politicians about this and see what they really think? One-to-one, there's concern. Yes, sometimes. Not many. One of the problems with my UKIP past was that until quite recently, people haven't wanted to talk to me. Because in people's minds, the UKIP it went to the right. It went anti-Islam, went anti-immigration, Football Lads Alliance and so on, and whatever. And they were tainted by that. And I've been tainted by that, although I left knowing that it would happen after I left. I left before it did. So but I was still, a little bit tarred with that brush. And I, rightly or wrongly, that's where UKIP went. That's a different conversation. But so it gave my ability to talk to people. It damaged that. But that's coming back. I have people I count as good friends in all political parties now, in Parliament as well. So, and increasingly I'm having those conversations. I think that there is an awareness that we've got a problem, but absolutely no clue what to do about it. And a little bit of they're not empowered to do anything. Not really. As individual MPs, if they stand up and they say something, then that's their career finished. Even Liz Truss didn't know what she could possibly, even if she did want to do something, it seems there's nothing anyone can do.
No. And, well, there is, we've got a situation now where we've got a political sort of revolution going on. We've got reform surging in the polls. Initially, because nobody knew, so disillusioned and disappointed, and asked to think this, invited to think this as well, that the uni party was over. It blamed them. They're all at fault. it was a little bit of a cynical ploy to an extent by Nigel, but reform is now surging in the polls and seems now to be starting to lock horns with the real issues of having to plan and prepare for another government. I think there is an opportunity in that. I hope there is, and that's down. Danny Kruger has joined Reform. I think that's a good thing for Reform and maybe a good thing for the country, because we have to bring in some serious statesmanship. That's not to say Nigel isn't, but the if you like, the institution that is the Reform machine needs to start thinking, right, we're not just an insurgent party here. We're riding to the rescue of the United Kingdom. That's what we're trying to do. But we've got to get this right. We can't. This can't be just about political games anymore. This has to be successful, and to do that, we've got to open up that dialogue with everybody, and we've got to make it. We've got to establish very clearly what it is we're trying to do here in the UK. Now they're not there yet, and I hope very much that they will get there. I think they can. So, but it's going to take leadership, and the Conservative Party, is it governable? That's the question. You know, conservative values, one would like to think, would lead us down that road. Yeah. But is it governable? Because we all know that half of the Conservative Party, parliamentary Conservative Party, even should be in the Liberal Democrats or somewhere. Yeah. I mean, they're not conservative. I mean, they're you know, the One Nation caucus, very poorly named if you know the history of One Nation conservatism. But they should be nowhere near the Conservative Party. If they had their sort of political integrity, they'd leave. You know, the kind of Unite the Kingdom stuff, a lot of people, you know, stop the boats is the big one. Right? Yeah. And I get it, because that's the visceral, you can actually see people coming in and it's illegal. And obviously that has to be stopped. So obviously that needs to be stopped. But I sometimes feel like it's a little bit of a distraction, because the legal immigration has been insane, the numbers. So that's, everyone's going, no, it's just the illegal. No, well, yes, but legal immigration, bloody hell. And it seems like there's what Liz Truss was saying, there seems to be a deep state or civil service, or just people part of the furniture that will just never allow us to stop that. Well, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair broke the civil service in my books. I mean, I was working for the Foreign Office when Tony Blair sort of brought in all sorts of changes, basically. And to be fair, without going into the history of it now, naturally, but to be fair, in terms of our relationship with the European Union, and the fact that the European Union provided so much of the input into heads of government meetings and so on, all the stuff that traditionally your home civil service would do to brief ministers and so on before major decisions and so on, that was all done by the European Commission increasingly. And then we had the Lisbon Treaty, which required us to coordinate our foreign policy and our defence policy with the other member states, and the European Commission acted in a facilitative role there, and that meant that their civil service, if you like, fed that process. So you had this massive civil service in the UK kind of duplicating what was going on in Brussels. So I can see that you would want to, you know, you'd think that well, in that he didn't know we were going to leave the European Union then, of course. And so you might think, well, we're duplicating a lot here. We can save some money. We can sell up some real estate, you know, fine. So you can see the logic. But he also brought in, he got rid of specialists in the Foreign Office, so linguists and so on, and brought in generalists, which is a European sort of model where people move around. So one minute you can be working in the Ministry of Justice, selling or buying furniture for magistrates' courts. This is an actual case that I know of. And then, you know, your next posting is head of section for the Nuclear Counter-Proliferation Department in the Ministry of Defence. Right. So you're a generalist. You don't have a specialist role. You don't know about geographical area or a thematic area. No, there are some exceptions, but far less than there used to be. So he broke that. But then Gordon Brown broke it even more by giving the civil service in political or independence. So he disconnected. So the civil service runs itself. Ministers don't run the civil service. So the ministers don't now run their government departments. Now, that must be reestablished. You cannot, I don't think you can have a functioning government where ministers are not in control. And I know that when he doesn't know this, I don't think, but when David Cameron, on his last visit to Helmand, when he went there, there were instructions from King Charles Street, from the Foreign Office, and from the Ministry of Defence not to brief him about certain things, because they didn't want him creating waves and getting involved in things that were already being dealt with.
That's mad.
So when your prime minister visits your country's #1 military operation, the people in that operation are being told not to brief him on certain aspects of it.
That is mental.
So that is insane. And that's what happens when you give the civil service independence from the political leadership. Can we do that? Yes, we can do that. We can do that. And the way to do that, I think, is, in a nutshell, is you've got to introduce legislation that brings the civil service back under democratic control. And again, you go to the United Nations, you go to any go to NATO, they require civil control of your own, democratic control and oversight of your armed forces. Well, if you've broken that relationship with your civil service, you're starting to lose that. What about policing? Who's telling the police chiefs what to do? Is it the Home Secretary, or is it a civil servant somewhere? So we don't know. So who's accountable? Who do you hold to account?
That's the madness of this.
It is. So it needs to be reestablished. Why that happened, you'd have to get Gordon Brown in here and ask him. He did it. But yes, it can be done. But again, you need to be prepared. You've got to have the moral courage and the vision, because you've got to have confidence in your vision that where you're going is the right place and it's in the interest of the country. A lot of politicians don't have that because they don't have the experience of the world to do that, to have that. You've got to have that. And then you introduce the right legislation, you can take control. But then you've got to have competent people in those positions to then assert that control. Because if they're wet, sort of kind of timid, uncertain people who are not leaders, they're managers, then it's not going to work well. So we need to bring that back too.
I've got one more question for you, but where can people find your work first?
My work?
Or your socials?
It's on X. It's at _, so it's the @ thing, _ Henry Bolton, fairly straightforward. I'm on TikTok, which I think is the no, that's Henry Bolton OBE. Very pretentious.
We'll put that. Well, congrats, though. But we'll put it on we'll link it up.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I can give it to you afterwards. I've got a Substack as well, which is Henry Bolton as well.
We'll put all of those on the links. And tell me, who is a heretic you admire?
I'm going to abuse this and say 3. Very briefly. Oliver Cromwell. Okay. Oliver Cromwell. He challenged and broke the divine right of kings at a time when England was religiously and socially incredibly orthodox, and the divine right of kings was a given. And he and others in Parliament challenged that and overcame it and established a new order. Now that's one hell of a heresy.
Yeah.
But it's interesting about heresy. I think actually we're on the heretics, but a lot of heretics in history aren't seen as such now, because they're either seen as having been highly successful in something because they were right and nobody else was, or they're long forgotten because they were wrong and everybody else was right. Then you've got Winston Churchill. He crossed the floor twice at a time when that was not heard of. It's happening all the time now. Yeah. I've done it many times, not the floor, but I don't know how many political parties I've been member of, but I follow my politics, not theirs. If you see what I mean. And also he had this. He was one of the very few voices who, at great personal reputational risk to himself, in a very uncertain world, stood firmly against appeasement of the Weimar Republic and Nazi Germany, when everybody else, he exercised moral clarity and courage before the war, even, at a time when his party and the country wanted to, because of the experience of World War I, they wanted a comfortable falsehood, that bubble that to live in, rather than the brutal reality of the world they were living in.
Sounds like today.
It does. And then finally, Nigel Farage. I mean, he challenged and again broke the idea that Britain's future was in the European Union. And I do wish he'd had a clearer plan afterwards. He's now talking about plans, but again, in a world in which it was a given that we were in the European Union, he turned that on its head. So
Brilliant. Those are 3 great heretics. People, please go follow Henry Bolton. I'll put a few of the links down below. He's been absolutely brilliant, wonderful, really interesting stuff and from experience. So go follow him, support him because he deserves that. Hit that like button and keep watching this channel.